Hello and welcome to the ScaleForm pipeline in CryEngine 5 for artist beginners. To be honest with you guys, I'm totally new to the engine myself and have no idea why am I recording this video, but I thought it could just save some time for some people out there, so let's just begin. First of all, I'm gonna assume that you already have CryEngine 5 installed and have a basic understanding of the sandbox editor. Then I'd suggest you to have your own HUD concept in mind while watching this video, as it could help you translate this information to your own specific design. I'd also assume that you have at least heard about Swift and Flash files in general, and you're not scared of typing some simple code, of course. There are also some basic facts about working with the ScaleForm and CryEngine in general. First is that there is no asset manager in the engine's editor, at least not the way you might expect it. CryEngine deals with asset files that are put in specific locations in your project folder hierarchy, so managing and categorizing your assets needs you to be familiar with CryEngine folder structure. Second, there is no direct support for the most commonly used material types we artists know about. But there are plugins shipped with the engine that converts our assets to specific file types CryEngine would understand, so you don't need to be worried about that at all. Third is the facts about ScaleForm pipeline itself. Let's see this chart to make a clearer understanding of the overall concept behind this video. This is basically how our pipeline works. In order to create a HUD for CryEngine, we have to first create assets. Then we're going to integrate them to the engine, and finally activate them inside. In other words, we're going to simply build our HUD in Adobe Flash and write our expected functionalities in ActionScript code. Then we're going to export the file as a Swift and convert it to GFX by using CryEngine GFX Exporter. Then we'll write an XML file to tell CryEngine how we want our assets to be exposed in the editor, and then put the files in related folders. Finally, we're going to go to the engine, creating a flow graph to draw our HUD to the screen and maybe create an event to call one of our functions. So let's just dive right in. I'm going to start from Inkscape, an open source vector-based graphic content creation tool I'm comfortable with. I've already made a simple dashboard HUD for this video, so I'm going to drag the SVG file in so you can see the export process. This is basically what I've made with Inkscape, and it's just simply a shape contained of a dashboard and an arrow in the center. So we're going to save it as something that could be read by Adobe Flash, which in our case would be my awesome HUD as a Flash XML graphics or FXJ. Now that we're done saving our FXG file, I'm going to close Inkscape already and open up the Adobe Flash CS6. The reason for using the Adobe CS6 is that Adobe has already dropped support for ActionScript 2 in their latest release, and CryEngine works with a version of ScaleForm that only supports ActionScript 2.0. So that means you're stuck with Adobe Flash CS6 or earlier, or either alternatives like Giotto and Flash Develop. All that being said, we're obviously going to create a new ActionScript 2 file here. In our new file properties tab, we are going to change some properties. And by the way, if you don't see our properties tab or accidentally closed it, here is where you'll find it under Window menu, Properties. Now we're going to change the size of our project file to say 1920 by 1080 pixels. It's not really that much important what size it is, it's more about a reasonable aspect ratio and positioning in general. So I'd suggest to go for a standard full HD. I'm also going to change the frames per second to 30. Not very important for this video as we are not dealing with animations and timeline to be more specific, but it's a good habit to do so. Then I'm going to change the stage background to a dark gray, something I'm used to, so I can see my white objects. This has nothing to do with our final exported Swift as it's not considered a solid background in CryEngine. It's just simply what we see in the background here and will be completely ignored by the engine later. So now we're going to import our FXG file by simply going to the File menu, Import, and choosing Import to Stage. Then in the Import dialog, I'm going to go to my desktop, ScaleForm, and open my awesome HUD.fxg. You might have already realized that we seem to have imported a white rectangle. To get rid of that rectangle, we need to first double-click on it. And when the Edit Object dialog pops up, we're going to approve it to be converted to a drawing object. Flash will then automatically put us in the drawing object. By clicking on the scene 1 here, we'll go back to the root and then we can get rid of the background rectangle by selecting it and pressing delete. Now we have our dashboard design considered a group, which if you double click on will go inside. But first, let's give it a good scale to work with. By holding the shift key, restrict the aspect ratio and scale the dashboard. Now we're going to go through all the grouping layers by double clicking on them unless we are on the drawing object itself. I don't even have any idea why it will be in that much abstraction, but let's just move on. When you see a pattern of white dots, that means that you are on the last level of abstraction in your design. So I'm going to select all by pressing Ctrl A and cutting them with Ctrl X, then go all the way back to the scene root and paste it with Ctrl V. Then I'm going to right click on it while it's still selected and convert it to a symbol. And in our case, I'm going to choose movie clip. And I'm going to name this _ dashboard. Okay, now we're going to do the same for the arrow. Going all the way down, cut, back to the scene root, paste, right click, convert the symbol, movie clip, and name it _arrow. Now we have a clean stage with two objects, arrow and dashboard. Now let's do some fancy stuff by changing the color of dashboard and arrow to white and make them glow. Double click on the dashboard, select the whole thing and change the color from Properties tab. Back to the scene, double click on arrow, select and change to the white and back to the root. Now select dashboard and in the Property tab, as a movie clip you should be able to see Filters panel. At the bottom of Filters panel, select Add Filter and choose Glow. I'm going to play with them to see which settings desires me most. And then do the same for my arrow. Okay, that's pretty much it. So let's give our dashboard and arrow instance names. I'm going to call this d_dashboard and for the arrow d_arrow. Now let's rename our current layer to contents and make a new empty layer for our ActionScript code, just to make things organized. Now I'm going to open up my Actions panel from Window menu. And I'm going to make sure I'm on my ActionScript layer selected. This way we'll be writing our ActionScript in the appropriate layer. Now we want to write just two functions, definitely two very simple functions. So let me show you how this works first. Imagine if your computer could walk outside and buy stuff, and you wanted to tell it to go buy some bananas for me. But your computer couldn't understand what does buy some bananas mean. In this case, you would need to first teach your computer what does it mean to buy some bananas, and then ask it to do so. This is how you teach your computer the functionalities in ActionScript 2. You're telling your computer I have a function, and it's called buy some bananas, following with a pair of parentheses and a pair of curly braces. But before we get to the pair of braces, let's go for return type. Every function has to have a return type, so your computer knows what should you expect to be returned from that function. In ActionScript, you simply go between parentheses and curly braces and say :banana. Well, obviously not banana in a real function, but let's just move on. This way your computer knows it has to expect banana type coming back from your function. Now let's talk about that pair of parentheses. What they do in your function is that they basically let you pass in some values to be used in the functionality. In our case, it could be a number value, so whenever we call buy some bananas, we could specifically say how many bananas we are talking about. This is how we define it. We type whatever the name we want to call it, and then put a colon and tell the computer what type of data it's going to be, which in our case it's a number. That's all about parentheses. Now there's just these curly braces left where the actual functionality is going to happen. Whatever we want to happen, step by step, is going to be defined inside these curly braces. In our funny example here, it's going to be the instructions on how to buy whatever number of bananas and then returning them from function. So after we defined our function, we can simply call it like this and put the number of bananas we want to get back. So this is going to return 1 bananas and this one will return 7 bananas. Well, it wasn't so hard, was it? Now let's get back to our pipeline. What we're going to do here is simply define two functions so we can use to either get our arrow's current x position or set its x position to a new value later. Oh, and these two forward slashes in my commenting lines is a legacy way of telling your computer, hey, I'm putting some notes in this line for myself, so don't bother trying to understand what it means, okay? Now let's write our own functions. Here we go. We have a function here, and I'm gonna name it getArrowPoseX, following with a pair of parentheses and curly braces. Well, our arrow's x position is obviously going to be a number, so we're going to have to say this is a number function. And we don't need to pass anything in, because our arrow has a position, and to get that position, we don't need to offer any information now, do we? That means we are going to leave the parentheses blank. Now let's get to the curly braces and tell what we want to do with this function. We want to get the arrow's x position, right? So we have to call it by instance name here. And here is what we called it, d_arrow. And by the way, ActionScript is object specific. Thus, we have to deselect our arrow and go back to our ActionScript layer frame 1 to continue working. So we're gonna say the arrow, well, the arrow what? The arrow's x position, of course, but let's look at this first. A dot is called so many things in computer programming world, from dot notation to member access operator. Let's say we have Colin Bishop, our beloved CryEngine mentor here, and we want to access to his right hand. In computer world, you have to go from parent to children in an object to address what you want. And dot simply tells your computer you're looking for sub-objects of the currently called object. So you'd say Colin.rightArm.hand to get access to Colin's hand. So let's access our arrow's x position then. We'll simply go for dot_x and put a semicolon to end the sentence. Also, we need to tell our function this is actually what we want to return. _x is simply a standard way to tell you're calling the x position value of a movie clip in ActionScript. We are already able to get our arrow's position, so let's make us able to also set it with a new value. Let's go for function set arrow pose x parentheses curly braces, and this time we are going to say we'll have our input value coming in, and it's going to be a number. And what is going to be returned from this function? Well, nothing. And in case you don't expect nothing to come out, you will simply say this function is going to return void. Void means nothing is going to return, so please expect nothing, thank you. d_arrow.x equals our input value with a semicolon at the end. Isn't it fantastic? We're just done with our function setup here. And as our function names are so obvious, I don't even need these comments, so I'm gonna get rid of them. Let's save our project somewhere for God's sake as myawesomehot.fla and go for the export part. Oh, and by the way, I've already forgot to say our project target is also restricted to Flash Player 10. So I'm gonna simply change this to Flash Player 10.3 and save again. Now let's export. Well, it's not called export actually. Flash likes it to be called publish. So here we go. But let's first look at the publish settings here and see what we got. Oh, and by the way, it's also accessible from our project properties tab right here. Now, well, we don't want an HTML wrapper for our HUD. We're not going to publish our HUD in a website, so I'm going to uncheck this. And look at my output file here. What it's going to do when you just leave it with a file name is that it's going to save your file exactly where your FLA Flash file is saved, which I'm cool with that. And myawesomehot.swf would do, of course. Also, I'm going to double check my target and script version, and we're done. Now let's publish, save, and close. Now we have our SWF file here, which if you open, you're going to see it doing nothing obviously. But before we get to the next objective video, let's check one of our functions to see if it really works. So I'm going to open the FLA file, make sure I'm on my ActionScript layer frame 1, then open my actions panel and simply make a call to our set arrow pose x function. Our arrow's x position is already in 958, and I'm going to call the function to set it to somewhere like here, which is nearly on 700 pixels. So let's put our arrow back and deselect and say 700.0 here, and simply go to the debug menu Debug Movie and choose Debug. Our arrow is in the center. Now let's go to Debug menu here and say Continue to see if our function works. Perfect, so we're doing it right. I'm gonna put 1200 here and debug again, play and bang, fantastic. Now let's get rid of this function call here and close Adobe Flash. Now we have our Swift file generated for the rest of the pipeline. In the next video, we're going to create an empty project in CryEngine and then convert our Swift file to GFX and put it where it should be on our projects folder. But for now, let me just restart my computer and see if Microsoft is gonna stop pushing notifications into my screen.